ये दाग दाग उजाला, ये शब गजीदा सहर, वो इंतजार था जिसका, ये वो सहर तो नहीं। ये वो सहर तो नहीं जिसकी आरज़ू लेकर चले थे यार के मिल जाएगी कहीं ना कहीं, फलक के दश्त में तारों की आखिरी मंजिल। कहीं तो होगा शबे सुस्त मौज का साहिल, कहीं तो जाके रुकेगा सफीनाए ग़मे दिल।
On 3rd June 1947, Lord Mountbatten, the last Viceroy of India, announced the partition of the subcontinent. Not only did this announcement see the birth of two new nations, it also gave birth to two Constituent Assemblies. The original assembly, which had 389 members, was now divided into two: 299 members in India and 79 members in newly created Pakistan. Created though they were at the same time, the two assemblies took wildly different paths. The Constituent Assembly of Pakistan took a route nearly 25 years long, including several constitution committees and 3 different constitutions. On today's episode, we explore the other assembly, the Assembly of Pakistan. How did they approach the constitution-making question? How did the political climate in Pakistan influence its constitution-making process?
Hello and welcome to Contested Nation, a podcast that discusses how the Constitution of India was written and how that remains relevant for India today. I'm Shruti, your host. This podcast is produced by Suno India in collaboration with the Equals Project.
To discuss this episode with us today, we have Dr. Ali Usman Kasmi, an associate professor at the Lahore University of Management Sciences. Born and raised in Lahore, Ali is a historian of modern South Asia. He's published 2 monographs, several journal articles, and chapters in academic works. He's a winner of the Karachi Literature Festival Peace Prize. He's previously been the recipient of the Newton International Fellowship for Postdoctoral Research. Since 2012, Ali has been teaching history at the Lums University School of Humanities and Social Sciences. So, Ali, let's talk about this first Constituent Assembly of Pakistan. It's first convened on August 11, 1947, just a few days before Pakistan's official Independence Day. Muhammad Ali Jinnah was elected as its president, and in an interesting parallel to Dr. Ambedkar in India, Jogendranath Mandal, a Dalit leader from East Pakistan, was elected as the chairman of the assembly. Now, Mandal had been a close associate of Dr. Ambedkar's and was actually instrumental in electing Ambedkar to the Constituent Assembly of India. Similar to Dr. Ambedkar, Mandal also served as the first law minister of Pakistan. And we will come back to talking about Jogendranath Mandal towards the end of our conversation today. The assembly itself consisted of 79 members, with the Muslim League holding an overwhelming majority. The Pakistan National Congress held 11 seats and became the chief opposition. Ali, according to you, who are the important members in this first Constituent Assembly? And what was their vision for Pakistan? Is there an imagination of the constitution outside the assembly? And what are people hoping for from the assembly itself?
Thank you. I think before we start discussing as to how the assembly operated, post-independence, it's important to understand that just like in case of India, the Pakistani Constituent Assembly was based on elections which had taken place in 1945-46 on restricted franchise. These members who were elected, who later on drafted a constitution for India, and debated various constitutional proposals for Pakistan. They were not elected based on adult franchise or universal franchise. So, like India, Pakistani Constituent Assembly comprised mainly of high caste men. In fact, all of them men, except for two women. And it's it was an important assembly in the sense that some of the leading members or leaders of the Muslim League, they were represented in that assembly, which includes Liaquat Ali Khan, who became the first Prime Minister of Pakistan. It includes Sir Zafarullah Khan, who was Pakistan's Ahmadi Foreign Minister. I emphasize on his Ahmadiness because that became a point of contention later on, as Ahmadis were later on declared as non-Muslims. And while Zafarullah Khan was Pakistan's foreign minister, there was a staunch movement against Ahmadis, demanding that Ahmadis should be declared as non-Muslims. So it's important to highlight that the composition of the assembly and people who held various important portfolios were from various backgrounds, as you already have pointed out. Jogendranath Mandal was a Dalit leader, similar, and who was given a very important portfolio. That the man was given the task to draft Pakistan's constitution, which is in a way, in my opinion, a similar kind of a gesture which Nehru gave in case of India, that asking a Dalit member to draft the future law, the future constitution of the independent republic. The similar gesture was given by Muhammad Ali Jinnah when he appointed Jogendranath Mandal in a similar fashion by appointing Zafarullah Khan as Pakistan's foreign minister. It was equally, giving an important gesture indicating that the new state is going to be inclusive of people from various backgrounds. Among other important members, I would say Mia Iftikharuddin from West Punjab, who was known for his, kind of Congressite communist leanings. The only member from West Punjab, I would say, who had these kind of political views, because there was so many others from the Eastern Wing, which had. Which previously either belonged to Congress or were, associated with a kind of a left-leaning kind of politics. This includes Hussain Shahid Sohrawardy, again a Bengali leader who later on became Pakistan's prime minister as well. Now, in case of East Pakistan, as you pointed out, the Pakistan National Congress was the major opposition party, and some of its members, they were the most vocal critics, during the first Constituent Assembly in various constitutional proposals which were floated, various pieces of legislation which were debated. They were the ones who were actually opposition members, because the remaining assembly comprised largely of Muslim League members. So from West Pakistan, there was hardly any opposition, except for, again, Mia Iftikharuddin. And later on, when Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, the Sarati Gandhi, or Bacha Khan, when he was sworn in, but he was not able to play a very effective role because he was in jail most of the times. So the major opposition in Pakistan from 1947 till 1954 were Hindu members from East Bengal, which includes Raj Kumar Chakravarti, Dharendranath Datta, Sarish Chandra Chattopadhyay. These were the people who put up a very strong opposition to various proposals that were being floated. Now, as for what was the imagination, I would say now that I have looked at this decade more closely for my work, I realized that there was a lot of optimism. I would say, you do come across these ideas that there's a general, you come across poetry by Faz, for instance, or other leftist poets who express certain kind of pessimism or disappointment that this is not the kind of post-colonial moment, let's put it this way, that they had imagined. Yet at the same time, you do find that there is a certain kind of optimism. People are trying to articulate a certain kind of an alternative vision for the country, and they are optimistic that the assembly will chart a new course, whether it will set up a certain kind of an Islamic state or an Islamic modernist state, or whatever kind of a state that it will establish, but it will lead towards, it will be charting, a new course in our history. So in newspaper articles, in letters to the editors, again, I understand that these were forums which were available to a select few. Only literate people were the ones who were contributing these kinds of articles or letters. But it still gives you a certain idea, some kind of an idea as to how people were enthusiastically involved in this process, and they were contributing to this larger discourse, public discourse on constitution making and ideas of Republican spirit in general.
That's so fascinating, and in many ways similar, really, to the beginning of the assembly in India, a theme that we will be touching upon throughout this episode. But before we move on, I do want to ask a little bit more about the religious composition of the assembly. What was the split between Muslims and Hindus?
The split is very clear. So for between, I think I'll have to divide this into two parts, because later on, as we discuss, you will know that there were two different constituent assemblies for Pakistan. The first assembly, which lasted till 54, and then there was another one which was in operation from 54 to 56. So in the first assembly, as I pointed out, it was predominantly non-Muslim members who were opposition members. So the split is very clear right from the moment when the objectors resolution is presented.
I'm also curious, Ali, to understand a little bit more about the two women in the assembly. I'll admit I found very little about their contribution to the constitution making process. So I'm curious to understand if you could speak a little bit more. Who are they? What are they doing within the assembly?
Not focused on their constitutional role or their what they contributed to assembly debates. Begum Shaista Ikramullah, one of them was Begum Shaista Ikramullah, the other one was Jahan Ara Shah Nawaz. So obviously they also, like other members, if they were high caste men, they came from critically influential, elite backgrounds. But you find their role, in fact, like them playing a more active role about the role of women in the new state, especially with regard to as to how the country should or the country should do to accommodate, to rehabilitate refugees and women who have been recovered, and they are and they become very active in various various schemes for the social uplift of women, emphasizing that women have a role to play as equal members, and that national development cannot take place unless women have an equal standing with men, right? So you do find their contribution largely in the on issues relating to social development. But when it comes to constitutional debates, I would not say that they have, or at least I would admit that have not come or not focused so much on that aspect of their contribution. But I would say that the political debate was largely was being dominated by these men, because they held influential position in the assembly, and also because they held important portfolios as well.
In 1949, the Objectives Resolution is presented before the Assembly in Pakistan. This resolution stated that sovereignty over the entire universe belonged to Allah Almighty alone, and the authority which He had delegated to the state of Pakistan through its people was a sacred trust.
Now, that objective resolution, which was presented by Liaquat Ali Khan in March 1949, laid down a blueprint for the future Pakistani Republic. And that future Pakistani Republic, as imagined by Liaquat Ali Khan and supported by so many other members of the assembly, presented the vision for an Islamic state. An Islamic state that he argued is going to be egalitarian, progressive, and which is going to be based on Islamic principles of democracy and social justice. And an Islamic state which is going to be fully, protective of its non-Muslim citizens. So while it can be argued, and it has been argued, that Islam was being instrumentalized by Pakistani political elite from the very beginning to establish or to override ethnic expressions of nationhood. But at the same time, I mean, it's very clear that there is a certain degree of you can clearly see a kind of a decolonial kind of an imagination of imagining a new kind of a republic. So Muslim League ideologues who were members of the assembly as well, who were leading intellectuals as well, people like Ishtiyaq Hussain Qureshi, people like Mahmood Hussain, people like Zafrullah Khan, they made very passionate speeches in the assembly, arguing that it's not going to be a theocracy, that theocracy is an alien concept to Islam, and that Islamic State is inherently going to be progressive. So, and even and the only Muslim member, as I already pointed out, who was critical, Mia Iftikharuddin did not vote against the objective resolution as such. So the only opposition, again, it came from East Bengali members, all of whom were Hindus. And they made it very clear that by proposing such a state, it's against the ideas of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, because Jinnah, in his very famous 11th August speech, which you have played as well, clearly stated that Hindus will cease to be Hindus and Muslims will cease to be Muslims, not in a religious sense, but in a political sense, as citizens of the state.
आप आजाद हैं, आजाद रहें। आप लोग इस मुल्क पाकिस्तान में अपनी अपनी इबादतगाहों, मस्जिदों या मंदिरों में जाने के लिए। आपका मजहब क्या है, जात क्या है, कौम क्या है, इसका हुकूमत के मामलात से कोई ताल्लुक नहीं।
That is a recreation of Muhammad Ali Jinnah's maiden address to the Constituent Assembly in August 1947. And this is the speech that Ali is referring to.
So that was the major argument, that Jinnah did not want such kind of an Islamic state to be established. All of them, all these non-Muslim members, they insisted that two-nation theory, while it might have been valid during the freedom movement to argue for a Muslim sovereign national state, it has ceased to hold any value once that state has been achieved. So they insisted that from two-nation theory, we should shift to one-nation theory, and that we want to be Pakistanis. We are Pakistanis, and that we have a claim to this land for centuries, and we want to live here. We have not left this land, and we insist that Pakistan is conceived as one nation, and we want to be part of that one nation. And thirdly, they argued that if this does not happen, then as Chattopadhyay very clearly, very emotionally said that then we will become second-class citizens. What you're proposing will lead to a situation where non-Muslims will gradually be marginalized, and eventually, when Jogindernath Mandal, who I referred to, he resigned in 1950 publicly by sending his resignation letter to Liaquat Ali Khan. He actually said that now there is no place for Hindus in Pakistan because of what has followed, because of the kind of discriminatory legislation or ideological framework in the form of objective resolution that the Assembly has passed.
As in life and the property and the religious belief should be fully protected by the state at any cost.
So, Ali, let's come back to Jinnah's maiden address to the Assembly. So much of the conversation is really dominated by what Jinnah would have wanted. When the objectives resolution is first presented in the Assembly, non-Muslims in the Assembly are very unhappy with it and felt it was against Jinnah's vision. So they're really hanging their hat on what Jinnah would have wanted. Sirish Chandra Chattopadhyay says, what I hear in this resolution is not the voice of the great creator of Pakistan, but that of the ulema of the land. Bhupendra Kumar Datta asserted that if this resolution were to come before this House within the lifetime of the great creator of Pakistan, it would not have come in its present shape. There are, of course, others who argue that this is just hogwash, that Jinnah was never really keen on secularism. After all, he wanted a Muslim nation. So, Ali, let's speculate for a second. What do you think Jinnah wanted?
It's very clear that his ideas were based on that of Islamic modernism, right? So a belief that Islamic modernist ideals serve as inspiration and are valid for establishing a modern Islamic state in our times. So he's driven by that kind of a belief. Let's put it this way. Now, as far as the 11th August speech is concerned, let me share this is a very kind of it's anecdotal, but it's interesting trivia, I would say. That in Pakistan now, it's a controversy. It's controversy, not like a recent controversy. It's a controversy which dates back to, in fact, when the speech was delivered, that there has been an attempt to censor that speech. That because the speech and the contents of that speech, they went against the sort of the general impression, the popular imagination of what Pakistan stands for, or how the public had largely imagined Pakistan movement or the rationale for Pakistan movement. So Jinnah's speech, it appeared, contradicted those principles or those imaginations. So there was from the very beginning an attempt to censor that speech. And there is some evidence for that as well. There was a journalist called Zamir Niazi who has written about it. And also, because, another quote unquote evidence is that the speech itself is not available, right? The recording of that speech is not available. So a few years ago, the Director General of Radio Pakistan, he made an attempt actually to find a recording for, he even reached out to the Indian radio archives and asked them if you have a copy of that speech or not. So all these kind of debates, they show you the importance of the speech, and the speech itself, it is picked up and it's quoted by non-Muslim members of the Assembly throughout the 1950s. They always refer back to that speech, and they say that this was the vision that Jinnah had for Pakistan. Now, as to the content and the context of that speech, I would say we have to understand, we have to realize that when Jinnah delivered this speech on 11th August 1947, the exact the Boundary Commission had not announced its decision yet. There was no understanding as to what will be the actual boundaries of Punjab and divided Bengal. And the transfer of population had not started to that kind of a mass extent, basically. The mass exodus of minorities from both sides had not taken place as yet, right? To that extent, at least. So there was, this apprehension maybe that, even if so even though the provinces were going to be partitioned, that it might still be a situation where a large number of Hindus and Sikhs will continue to live in West Punjab, and in East Bengal as well, right? So in a way, Jinnah's speech was meant to address that audience, especially non-Muslims, that you have nothing to fear. That now that we have achieved our sovereign state, in that sovereign state, we will ensure that you're treated as citizens and not as a minority, right? So for me, that context is important. That Jinnah was speaking to an audience, is trying to address their concerns. He was trying to assure them that it will be a one nation state, and that the two nation theory, in that sense, has ceased to exist.
It's so interesting to think about the context in which that original speech is made, right? Both on the Indian and Pakistani side, there's no clear idea at this point of the horrors and the violence that partition is going to bring about. But of course, by 1949, when the Objectives Resolution is brought about, the reality of partition is much clearer to everyone, as is its bitterness and violence. Ali, why was the Objectives Resolution important? And how was it received outside the assembly?
Yes, to answer your questions, I think there was a lot of debate as to why it's important. As you pointed out, that and it was sort of implied as well, that it had to be Islam. It had to be Pakistan had to be to incorporate some notion of an Islamic state. Otherwise, there was that was the general sense. Otherwise, what was the rationale? I mean, if Muslims could live their lives under a secular state, then they could have easily lived that life in case of an Indian republic as well, right? So the idea was that, or the promise of Pakistan was that it will serve as this kind of a laboratory where we will provide these, we will serve as a role model for the rest of the world. We'll develop Islamic principles of democracy and social justice, which will be emulated by the rest of the world, right? So that was the promise, or that was the sort of the optimism. But and also the members of the assembly, they're very clear in saying, people like Liaquat Ali Khan, Ishtaq Hussain Qureshi, they're very clear in saying that look, there cannot be this kind of a distinction between private and public when it comes to Islam, and Islam is all pervasive. That Islam is not a religion in an ordinary sense of the word. It is a deen, or it's a system, it's a code of life which impacts all aspects of individual, collective, private, public life, right? So it has to be the basis of, the foundation of organizing a new society, a new political order. It has to have its mark there. Whereas the non-Muslim members, and also later on in the post-54 assembly, the Muslim members, again from Bengal, they insisted that Pakistan already is an overwhelmingly Muslim state, even though back then it had not substantial, but like 10% of non-Muslim population, 10 to 15% non-Muslim population as well. But still, it is, they argued, for all means and purposes, it is an Islamic state. It is a Muslim society. You do not really have to put it out there. Now, the concept of secularism, it becomes very problematic because in the sense that even Indian constitution did not use the word secular as such. I mean, it was a later amendment, if I'm not wrong. So, and the way to look at it, I think there's a recent work by Sadia Saeed, who says that it's a better way of maybe describing it as desecularization, in the sense that the language of law is changing. It's increasingly acquiring a certain kind of an Islamic idiom. So that, I think, that I understand as a more sort of like valid explanation for what was happening. Now, as for public reception, I would say that again, obviously, since it was using an Islamic kind of like slogan, so it had a wider appeal. But at the same time, I mean, there is a vibrant press. So, for instance, newspapers like Pakistan Times and Imroz, both of them, they were left-leaning, edited by Faz Ahmed Faz, owned by Mia Iftikharuddin. So they were kind of critical that you are trying to sort of use this as a smoke screen, basically, that you do not intend to democratize, you do not intend to sort of hand power to people, or to carry out real reforms, like to carry out land reforms, or to or to do something for the large majority of poor, landless peasants and all of that. And which they argued, again, they did not say that it should not be called an Islamic State, that there is no need for bringing in Islam. They said, but that instead of doing what an Islamic State is meant to do, which is to provide social justice and to do land reforms and to provide labor with their with the fruits of their labor. This is not what you are focusing on. Rather, you are focusing on the semantics of an Islamic State, which does not really translate too much, right? So this is so there is that. But more importantly, I would say that the objectives resolution was presented because the state otherwise was very anxious that the ulama and certain Islamic political parties will otherwise capitalize on this issue, and that might undermine the authority of Pakistani state. So there's one very famous instance of Maulana Maududi of Jamaat-e-Islami, because Maulana Maududi of Jamaat-e-Islami insisted that there could not be, because the state was thinking of introducing an oath of allegiance and asking all its civil servants and public servants, because so many of them had migrated from India, that you should all take an oath of allegiance to the new state. And Maududi was clear that unless there is an indication that the new state is going to be based on an Islamic constitution, we will not sort of take this oath of allegiance to that state. So by passing this resolution, the state indicated its intent that it is going to establish, or at least it aspires to become, an Islamic state. Whether or not it ever became an Islamic state, which could satisfy the sort of like the demands of Maulana Maududi, or could match the vision which Maulana Maududi had, but he still could say that, look, now the state has at least indicated, or has expressed its desire to transform itself gradually into an Islamic state. So now we can be obedient, faithful citizens of that state, and it's now binding on us to follow that state, right? So these are like the kind of mixed reactions which you find in the larger public.
That's a really good reminder that the constitution making process is rarely just about the law. Something that we talk about a lot is how all constitution making processes are trying to strike this balance between aspirational values and frameworks for the country and the political reality, the need to create a document that appeals to the widest number of constituents, that encourages people to join and accept the constitution and the nation. So they're really walking this tight line between the two. But Ali, I'm at this point going to ask you to fast forward a little and move to 1985.
Point number 2 is, when I took over on 5th of July, I promised 3 things. I said, first and foremost, I will bring back the Islamic values. I will venture for the Islamization of laws and bring in Islamic values. And third, I hold the elections.
In 1985, the Zia-ul Haq government introduces the Objectives Resolution into Article 2A of the Constitution. Now, Zia's tenure itself is slightly controversial. It saw the rise of Islamic rather than secular law. I'm curious, what has been the impact of introducing the Objectives Resolution into the Constitution and making it a substantive part of the Constitution?
Yes, this was in 1985 when objectors' resolution was made the substantive part of the Constitution. And in a way that there is a brief period, and there's an excellent chapter on that by Martin Lowe's book, that that it was increasingly invoked by Supreme Court judges to read the Constitution and some of and even the Criminal Code of Procedures and a range of other statutes and laws based on this interpretation, right? That where objective resolution becomes sort of like assumes this supra-constitutional character, that in a way it acquired for a brief moment of time an overriding power over any other aspect of the Constitution, because it could be said that a particular sort of a clause in the Constitution or the penal code is invalid because the supreme law of the country, which is Islam or Sharia, has a different understanding, right? So the judges could invoke objective resolution to then, substantially amend, change, read, interpret a provision of the Constitution or even the penal code. But that lasted for like 3 years. And as Martin Lau has mentioned, that it was then eventually overturned in Hakim Khan case in 1988. So it lasted for 3 years, but does not mean that it has, that it has been rendered ineffective. You can say that it's now sparingly used, but it can still be used by Supreme Court judges, and they can still invoke this argument that look, since Islam or Sharia or Quran and Sunnah are the supreme sources of law, and they are, in a way, the basis for Pakistan. In a way, you can say this idea, which has been debated in case of Indian Constitution as well. What is it called? The integral structure of the Constitution. There's the basic structure. Thank you. So just like there's a basic structure kind of an argument. So that's the basic structure. So even if the parliament wants to, it cannot undo that basic structure of the Constitution. So that is the most integral component of the Constitution. So in a way, it still is there, but it's not used as frequently as it was being used for that brief period between 1985 and 1988. And there were many pieces of legislation which the ulama were they wanted those kind of like laws to be overturned. Most importantly, the Muslim the family law, which had been in operation since 1961. Right, so the objective resolution continues to be the substantive part of the Constitution, but it's no longer used in that fashion. But it still can be.
Throughout the length and breadth of Pakistan, the death of that great leader, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, has come as a tragic and personal loss. In Karachi, before a sorrowing multitude, Pakistan's creator and first Governor-General was laid to rest. Chief mourner was Mr. Jinnah's sister, his devoted companion through many years of unceasing struggle. To every member of the Muslim state, Mr. Jinnah had been a figure as loved and revered as Mahatma Gandhi had been to the peoples of India. By the strength of his faith, Muhammad Ali Jinnah had made the dream of Pakistan into a reality and will ever be remembered as the father of his people.
While the Constituent Assembly was discussing the draft of the Constitution, political turmoil beset the country. Jinnah passed away in September 1948. Prime Minister Liaquat Ali Khan was assassinated in 1951, and Governor General Khwaja Nazimuddin took over the prime ministership. Now, his leadership was fraught with problems, most notably the rise of Bengali nationalism in East Pakistan. In 1952, his insistence on Urdu as the national language led to rioting and unrest across the country. Nazimuddin invoked martial law and eventually found himself dismissed by the Governor General. Really the first instance of a civilian head of government being dismissed. Ali, I'm curious why did the Governor General take this extreme step of dismissing Nazimuddin, and what was its impact?
So, like I said, that the assembly was so overwhelmingly dominated by the Muslim League that they quickly assembled, behind the new prime minister, and there was no opposition. There was no opposition. I keep on insisting that the only opposition were these 10, 11 members from the Pakistan National Congress, and since all of them were Hindus, and they had to treat very carefully, right? So they keep on insisting, on democratic values and holding on to the constitution and all these kind of things. But at the end of the day, they have a limited. There's a limit to the kind of influence that they were able to exercise in such affairs.
Nazimuddin was followed by Muhammad Ali Bogra, a diplomat from East Bengal. Now, Bogra was determined to pass the constitution. It had been in discussion for nearly 7 years. But just as the Constituent Assembly was getting ready to pass this final draft of the constitution, Governor General Ghulam Muhammad dissolved the assembly, stating that, look, this assembly had taken too long and it had lost the confidence of the people. Maulvi Tamizuddin, the president of the assembly at the time, challenged the dissolution and won the case in the Sindh Chief Court, but lost it when it was challenged in the federal court under Chief Justice Muhammad Munir. And so the first Constituent Assembly of Pakistan was dissolved before it can even pass the constitution. Ali, what is the legacy of this first assembly of Pakistan?
Yeah, I think it's very important. That's one of the most defining moments, I think, of Pakistan's history. 1954 is extremely important in Pakistan's history. So many things happened. Pakistan formally joined the American camp. They signed SEATO, Southeast Asian Treaty Organization. East Pakistan, elections were held in East Pakistan, where Muslim League was lost like anything. The opposition parties, they bagged almost like 99% seats, 95% seats. So the Muslim League was routed from East Bengal. So that's a very important year. And 1954 is when the first Constituent Assembly was dissolved. So the act itself did not really have any legal basis. The Governor General did not have the power to dismiss the Constituent Assembly. The Governor General had the power to dismiss the Council of Ministers. Even that power was taken away from him. In fact, and the clipping of that power triggered Ghulam Muhammad into action, and he reacted and he dissolved the assembly. One could argue that, okay, the assembly was in operation, was running for almost 7 years. And even though it was very close to, Dawn reported that within 2 weeks the bill will be ready and that it will be passed. But still, the argument was that an assembly cannot indefinitely continue its operation and argue that it cannot be dissolved because it's still not been able to accomplish what it was tasked to do. But at the same time, there was no provision as such in the government, the amended Government of India Act of 1935, which had been in operation as a constitutional framework in Pakistan. So when the matter was taken to court, first to Sindh High Court, and Maulvi Tamizuddin, who was the Speaker of the Assembly, he took that matter to the court. And also, again, there's an interesting anecdote that he actually had to wear a burqa to hide himself to reach the High Court. Otherwise, there were rumors that he will be picked up and that he would not be allowed to reach the High Court. Anyways, so and he petitioned that the High Court should issue a warrant, listen to his prayer and issue an order in his favor. And the Sindh High Court unanimously overturns the decision. And they rule in favor of Maulvi Tamizuddin. The Chief Court, or the Supreme Court, Pakistani Supreme Court, headed by the infamous Justice Munir, who's become a very notorious, infamous character in Pakistan's judicial history, ruled against this decision, the majority 4-1, saying that, and it was a very mere technicality. They did not go into the question whether the Governor General had any legal constitutional right to dissolve the assembly. He does not go into that question at all. They dismissed the petition on a mere technicality, saying that the power to issue warrants, which was used by the Sindh High Court, had not become a law yet because it had not been signed by the Governor General. So until and unless any piece of legislation passed by the Constituent Assembly is not signed by the Governor General, it does not become a law. It was a mere technicality. And it had an impact on dozens of other laws which had similarly not been signed by the Governor General, right? So using that technicality, they overturned Sindh High Court's decision, and so that set a very, very ugly precedent, because there was clearly no legal basis for dissolving the assembly. So I would say that, in my opinion, and maybe others would disagree, but now I increasingly think that the first Constituent Assembly and even the second Constituent Assembly and up to 1956, this was one of the most vibrant democratic debate which took place in Pakistan. And even though, it's controversial in the sense that even though general elections throughout the country did not take place, but they were provincial elections based on adult franchise, universal franchise, which took place in Punjab, in Bengal, frontier. And more importantly, the major issues relating to Pakistan's ideology, education system, language, federation, all these issues, they were debated in the assembly. And the quality of debate, if you read those debates, it's excellent debate which happened. So in my opinion, the first Constituent Assembly and then the second Constituent Assembly, they set the sort of like they left a very vibrant sort of debate, so to speak, which was relating to so many issues relating to state, nation, religion, language, so on and so forth. So in that sense, it's very important, and it's extremely important that. And although I realize that unlike India, which became a republic, which passed its constitution in 1950, and then went on with its with other issues, held elections, reorganized provincial boundaries, and this and that. So with that kind of narrative, the role of Pakistan's Constituent Assembly is often overlooked, and we tend to assume as if there were no competing political ideologies or contestations, or so the intellectual content of that assembly is generally overlooked. So, which I argue was extremely important, and it continues to serve a very important kind of like some kind of a foundational text from which one can learn a lot about Pakistan's history.
Throughout this conversation, we have touched upon the similarities between the assembly in India and the assembly in Pakistan. Let's talk about the differences for just a second now. Why was there such a difference between the journey of these two assemblies?
Yes, I think this is a very interesting question, and one could say that even though India had, one could say that India had bigger problems, like bigger kind of like ethnic, caste-based differences, religious differences. Pakistan had comparatively fewer problems in that sense, but still. But Pakistan had bigger administrative challenges, right? So the new state, which was carved out, had very little resources, and the impact of partition and the impact of massive influx of refugees was much bigger for Pakistan as compared to India. India is a much bigger country, had greater resources. So for Pakistan to manage itself, it required at that moment a very kind of a centralized state structure in a way. So that's one possible reason. But then there are other explanations as well. There is work by Maya Tudor, who argues that look, Congress had a much longer history of a mass-based political movement, whereas the Muslim League only became a more populist kind of a movement in the late 1930s and then early 1940s. Prior to that, it was largely a political party of landlords, and did not really have much of a wider public appeal, right? So that's one way of looking at it. And then there is Ian Talbot's argument about, and others have also argued that, Professor Wasim and Ishtiaq Saab, that Pakistan's political inheritance, was that of a garrison state, in the sense that the British investment in what became West Pakistan. In case of East Pakistan, in any case, it was a rural hinterland. So without Calcutta, as Jinnah famously said, it's man living without his lungs. So Bengal was a rural hinterland. In case of West Pakistan, it had been developed by the British mainly as a garrison to ward off any kind of threat from, Tsarist Russia and then Soviet Russia. So the biggest cantonments, they were built in Quetta, in Rawalpindi. The Northern Command was stationed in Rawalpindi, right? So Balochistan was not even a province. It was comprised of semi-sovereign kind of tribal states. At the Northwest Frontier Province, the name itself tells you a lot. It's a frontier province. It's a frontier between Afghanistan and British India, right? So there were no democratic sort of, even in Punjab, which provided the bulk of recruitment to the British army. So democratic reforms were introduced in this region very late. So that's one of the reasons why it could not have developed that kind of a democratic structure. But having said that, it does not mean that it was essentially lacking in those values, or that there was an impossibility of transforming Pakistan into a democratic polity. I would say that there was one additional factor as well, that a lot of Pakistani leadership was they were migrants, right, from UP, from United Provinces, and from Punjab, and they did not have a constituency in what became Pakistan, right? So it was a challenge for them. In case elections were to be held, they did not stand a chance to return to the assembly, right? So and also Pakistan was unable to resolve this very basic question early on, the question of political equality, right? So one could say that in case of India, well, look, I mean, let's have political equality on paper, like everyone has the right to vote. And the question of social equality, that of caste, religion, class, can be deferred, right? So you can, as you said, this aspirational part of the constitution making process and so on and so forth. But even the question of political equality in Pakistan was a contested one, because of the East Pakistani majority and the Punjabi or the Urdu-speaking dominance of the bureaucracy and the military in the West Pakistan side, right? So even there, the question of political equality between, among all Pakistani citizens, even that took a while to settle. So it was in the early 1950s, after which there could be this kind of consensus as to how seats will be distributed in a manner that a parity is maintained between East Pakistan and West Pakistan. So these are so it's not to say that, the people, I'm not at all trying to argue that the people of West Pakistan were like inherently undemocratic, or they did not have training in democratic traditions or practices. I'm just saying that the contingent sort of factors, political factors, and this power play which was going on was more important as to why the trajectory in case of Pakistan was much different than in India.
After the first assembly was dissolved, a second Constituent Assembly was created with equal members from East and West Pakistan. Within a month, the assembly passed a constitution which was promulgated on 23rd March 1956. Unfortunately, however, this constitution was really short-lived. On 7th October 1958, President Sikandar Mirza declared martial law just before the 1959 elections, and the constitution was abrogated. On 27th October 1958, Mirza was deposed by General Ayub Khan, who now became the new president. Under Ayub Khan, Pakistan saw its second constitution in 1962, and this second constitution was not passed by the consent of elected representatives, like the first two assemblies had been, but it was passed by the president himself. Unfortunately, this constitution also was very short-lived. On 25th March 1969, just about 7 years after it had been passed, it was abrogated by President Yahya Khan. It was only in 1970, nearly 22 years after independence, that Pakistan held its first elections based on universal franchise and elected Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. A third Constituent Assembly was elected on 17th April 1972, and after a year of deliberations, the third Constitution of Pakistan was promulgated on 14th August 1973. This marked the end of one phase of Pakistan's 25-year constitutional journey.
1940, from the 1943 till date of Ambedkar, 1956, Rabindranath and Ambedkar fought for the center.
That was Jagdish Mandal, the son of Jogendranath Mandal. To end this episode, we'll go back to the very beginning, to Jogendranath Mandal, the chairman of the First Assembly, the first Law Minister of Pakistan. Mandal, like some, believed that an equitable future devoid of casteist divides was only possible in Pakistan. But by the year 1950, Mandal was dejected by the course that the country had taken, especially in light of the killings of Dalits in East Pakistan. He returned to West Bengal, where he was treated as a traitor really, and lived a fairly low-profile life for the rest of his days, working for the betterment of Dalits. Ultimately, Mandal found that neither country held the promise of an equitable future, for Dalits at least. Ali, let's end this conversation today by discussing the rights of minorities. Now, the question of minority rights is one that is central to the Indian Constitution and dominates public life in the country even today. There are some who are skeptical of it. Ambedkar, in one of his works, talks about how constitutions are constitutions of might, not right. What has been the Pakistani constitution's approach to minority rights, and how successful has it been in protecting them?
I would say, first of all, Mandal in Pakistan is a hero for a number of Pakistani liberals who would like to who critique the statist ideology and and a certain kind of Islamization that has happened. So Mandal is always invoked in Pakistani liberal discourse as a person who exemplifies what Jinnah wanted for this country, and the impact of deviation from Jinnah's vision. So Mandal is very central in that kind of historical.
We asked Ali if this was similar to the position that Dr. Ambedkar holds in India.
Yes, in a way, but in case of Ambedkar, he drafted the entire constitution, and so obviously it becomes a different figure. But yeah, in a way, you can say that. Also, so as you just pointed out, like you referred to Dr. Ambedkar's statement. So similar statements were given by Muslim members during the objectors' resolution was being discussed, and when they said that you keep on asking for protections and guarantees, but is eventually, even if, let's say, they said, even if it's going to be a secular state, but it's eventually on the on the goodwill of the majority community. That if the majority community acts in a reasonable manner, only then it's going to ensure, so in a way, like, no law as such is going to protect you against the tyranny of majoritarianism and so forth, right? So that was and that's one of the reasons why they felt that if it's if these guarantees, if these exhortations, if these rights are articulated in an effective language, in a moral language, in the language of Islam, then they will have even more sort of like a binding impact, because because then people will feel religiously obligated to follow them, and not just because they are law. And that's somewhat similar to the kind of debate on whether secularism is an imposition from the top, and that whether we can draw upon Indic values of tolerance because they are more, that kind of debate. So as far as the present constitution, look, I have it might be kind of a controversial statement, but I'm not sure if I'm able to explain it in a good way. But post 71 Pakistan, it has close to 98% of Muslim population. So obviously there are internal differentiation between Shia, Sunni, Deobandi, Barelvi, everything. It's not a homogeneous entity. But in that sense, and then there are, like, within that, ethnic, linguistic groups. But in that sense, Pakistan does not have a minority problem in that sense, right? So where it's where it becomes the minority group becomes so powerful that it poses a threat, right? So that, or it poses a certain kind of an anxiety, let's say, the fear of small numbers, as Arjuna Padurai puts it. It's a very marginalized minority, mostly caste Hindus in Sindh, and Dalit Christians in Punjab, right? So Dalit Christians and Dalit Hindus, so that they're so marginalized, and there's such a little, part of the population. So in that sense, it's not really comparable to, let's say, India and its minorities. But so there is one thing which is like the usual guarantees, right? So every constitution is going to say that, look, we are going to protect you and enable you to live your life to the fullest, and so on and so forth. Although in case of Pakistani constitution, the exception that the constitution has made is with regard to Ahmadis. So because initially the Ahmadis, when they were declared as non-Muslims in 1974, the premise was, or the promise was, that if you accept this status as a non-Muslim minority, so that minorityism, in a way, it's going to protect you. That as a minority, you will have rights, constitutionally guaranteed rights. But eventually, and that's what the ulema also sort of like, they were pushing for, that look, we are going to accept them as minority. But post 74, post 1980s, the language shifted from minority to that of not even Zimmis, or not even Kafir. So the language about Ahmadis shifts from minority to apostates, basically. And apostasy, in a way, obviously, in the classical Islamic law, an apostate, majority of scholars would say that an apostate should be put to death, right? So in a way, so the Ahmadi, in a way, it's a very exceptional case in Pakistan, where in fact it's where no rule applies, no law applies to them to safeguard or to protect their rights. Otherwise, in Pakistan, there's a deeper history, there's a long, complex history. I'm not going into that, but Pakistan now has come to a point where, in fact, unlike India, where, if you find instances of, let's say, temple desecration or a minority group being targeted, it becomes the Pakistani civil society is very vocal about it, and the Pakistani courts, they go out of their way to safeguard and protect them. right? So so in a way, Pakistani law and Pakistani constitution now, when it comes to minorities, Christians and Hindus, it takes a very proactive stance.
सुना है हो भी चुका है फिराक़ ज़ुल्मत व नूर, सुना है हो भी चुका है वसाल मंजिलो गाम, बदल चुका है बहुत अहले दर्द का दस्तूर, निशाते वस्ल हलालो अज़ाब हिज्र हराम, जिगर की आग, नजर की उमंग, दिल की जलन, किसी पे चारे हिजरा का कुछ असर ही नहीं, कहां से आई निगारे सबा किधर को गई, अभी चराग सरे रह को कुछ खबर ही नहीं.
If you like this episode of Contested Nation, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with all your family and friends. And do leave us a review.